Manipulism and the Weapon of Guilt, Collectivism Exposed. Written by Mikkel Clair Nissen. Narrated by David Bucci. Chapter 3. A New World Disorder. Besides high concentrations of toxic fluoride, I have asked myself, in irony, if the Danish government has added something to the water supply. But then again, I choose not to believe much in conspiracies. I do, however, see corporatism as unconstructive, and if there truly is a conspiracy to create authoritarian corporatism, a new world order, I see only two ways to accomplish its creation. Absolute authoritarian mind control can be achieved through either fear or bribery. Social equality is one way to ultimately achieve totalitarianism through democratic socialism. However, this passive-aggressive psychological approach is a slow option. The mental weapon of fear would undoubtedly be the quickest way to accomplish totalitarianism, which could be accomplished by spreading fear through terrorism, followed by disarmament, and ultimately a complete fascist military takeover. Threat and the fear of insecurity, for example, crime and recession, allow authorities quick access to exceptional power of authority. To disable capitalism's market freedom, the global warming issue proves to be a great tool to promote totalitarian collectivism. Though I am not in denial of any likely effects of CO2, if studying the subject carefully, one will factually find that the theories of global warming have not been proven. Climate change may be caused by factors other than merely human impact, and blaming people for global warming is a convenient tactic employed to undermine and control people through guilt. The theory of global warming is the perfect tool, misused by collectivists to apply rising, generally hidden, taxes, duties, and fees. An everyday story. Once in Denmark in a debate, a girl who attempted to manipulate by using the weapon of guilt started to enthusiastically explain with absolute excitement how she held a public lecture at an educational institution using a PowerPoint presentation. People applauded when she proved that on a daily basis, 1 million American citizens die from starvation. This girl's attitude is typical of a collectivist who is driven by severe inferiority complex and loathes Americans for their confidence. I laughed to myself thinking, I guess, were this true, then you will be overjoyed at the end of a year when the entire American population of a little over 300 million people has died of starvation. Grandiosity is the diagnostic hallmark of pathological narcissism, also known in psychology as superiority complex, which characterizes a superficial identity of superiority, a defense mechanism that occurs to conceal a person's inferiority complex. Conversely, radical collectivist narcissism to some extent disguises superiority complex and derives more or less entirely from inferiority complex. Narcissism on the political left wing, therefore, is very different from autonomous narcissism. One does not need to possess greater psychological understanding to realize that all people create their self-esteem through self-assurance, proving themselves or being approved of by others. The Marxist, bound by oppressive collectivist mentality, is coerced not to express personal self-encouragement, a denial of the emerging individual self, so the Marxist suffers from unabated low self-esteem. This in turn disguises the superiority complex. Driven by severe pathological narcissism, and to obscure these severe inferiority complexes, the Marxist creates a pathological illusion by utilizing the notion known as social equality, that all people are and should be treated equally, as an excuse to debase others. Marxists and collectivists in general alter reality through using magical thinking. An individual showing any sign of self-assured behavior, such as expressing oneself confidently, is considered self-absorbed. What in fact happens, when observed from the mind of the Marxist, is that signs of true self-assurance or self-encouragement trigger the Marxist severe inferiority complex. In turn, this makes the person feel diminished. The ensuing result is a subconscious narcissistic response, an actual threat, a narcissistic injury, which creates an urge to intimidate, belittle, or humiliate. In other words, I feel like nothing, so you should too. Since the collective narcissistic inhibitions are programmed from early childhood, these emotions of severe inferiority and the resultant pathological narcissism can be observed in just about all of the Danish population. Inhibitions, therefore, are created subconsciously and involuntarily. Consequently, the inferior, undermined person has very little understanding of, or control over, these inhibitive emotions. From a skilled psychological viewpoint, to find anyone in Denmark who shows genuine strong self-esteem is a truly rare experience. And with only one truly mentally liberated nation left in the world, the United States of America, no one has any other nation for comparison. Unlike in liberated cultures, completely normalized antisocial behavior can be observed commonly in all levels of society in Denmark. While living abroad, I remember myself telling people that one is not able to easily differentiate between social classes in Denmark's almost completely equilibrated lower middle class society simply because, regardless of social status, Danes cuss constantly and lack courtesy and manners. This is the case even on children's television with its constant antisocial behavior, foul language, negative attitudes, and name-calling. Again, I offer this as an example of the lower classes' attempt to equilibrate themselves by purposely spoiling willingness for personal self-improvement by means of destroying the social ladder. Antisocial behavior is obscured by communizing it into society from early childhood, thereby spreading maladaptive behaviors into all societal levels. For what was otherwise considered low-class behavior is now normal. When the whole society acts like low-class people, there is no lower class anymore and no need for self-improvement to climb a social ladder that no longer exists. This allows perfect implementation of manipulism, denigration, projection, manipulation, enticement, and guilt, providing the necessary means for enabling the continuation of collectivism's equilibrating mental and societal assimilation. I once read a joke describing the extreme inferiority complex facilitating social equality. A journalist had ended up in hell. He looked around and saw great bonfires with big pots placed on top, one pot for each ideology in which people were boiling. Demons stood guard beside each pot, so no one could escape from them, except no guard stood by the Marxist pot. Thinking this was odd, he sought advice from the devil and asked, "Why is the Marxist pot the only pot without guards?" The devil replied, "No need for them. Should anyone try to pull themselves up, their fellow citizens will make sure to pull them back down again." In order to truly understand collectivism, it is vital to understand that collectivism is a mental state created by the weak mind. The problem with social equality is that it is achieved through mental equilibration. It is not that society lifts the lower class, but that the lower class weakens society. The foundation that drives democratic socialism is low self-esteem, severe inferiority complex, pathological narcissism, that over the years, as radicalization progresses, spreads mental weakness, creating an epidemic that eventually reaches the farthest right-wing individualistic voters of society. This process of continuous malignant narcissistic coercion sadly deprives the very weakest of society's citizens, those without any ability to ever raise their self-esteem. This results in an endless denial of the individual self, those who are weakened to such extremes that they are driven by personality disorders, most commonly psychopathy and narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. Severe pathological narcissism, which is now completely communized, again perfectly empowers the collective human organism progressively. Narcissists can now roam freely among society as ordinary citizens, further normalizing maladaptive behaviors into all societal levels and allowing society to live in an entirely altered reality, twisted by the collectivist deprived state of mind. Antisocial behaviors are completely acceptable. Confidence is dreaded and, in fact, viewed as abnormal. Narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, and antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, both involve the same cluster of characteristics found in psychopathy, Thus, the terminology psychopath in psychology is generally used to characterize antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD. Psychopathy is similar in many respects to ASPD, characterized as a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others. A pattern having begun in childhood or early adolescence and continued into adulthood. Thus, psychologists have argued that most psychopaths meet the criteria for ASPD, while most individuals with ASPD are not psychopaths. Hence, the more appropriate terminology to describe people with antisocial personality disorder would be narcissist sociopaths. Psychopathy is perfectly disguised by general public misapprehension, given that the general impression associated with the psychopath is violence and criminality. In fact, psychopaths are only rarely violent or psychotic. Standard in psychopathy, however, is the display of more cunning traits such as Machiavellian egocentricity, demonstrating pathological lying, being manipulative, superficial charm, living a parasitic lifestyle, displaying a calculated ability to regulate one's own behavior in order to exploit others for personal gain, in addition to a grandiose sense of self-worth, failing to accept responsibility for personal actions, blame externalization, and having unconcern for the feelings of others. Traits that are all ordinary in communists, socialists, and fascists. According to the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, published in 2000, narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, allegedly appears in 0.5 to 1% of the general population. The APA's research is conducted on, and the statistics refer to, the confident American individualistic population. However, this research and statistical data are incredibly inaccurate in regard to radicalized collective societies. Appropriate research must be conducted on collectivists. As well, careful analysis ought to be carried out on the general populations of Europe, including France, Germany, Holland, Italy, Greece, and particularly the Scandinavian countries. Such studies would demonstrate extreme levels of pathological narcissism in these countries, whereof a great part, figures likely as high as 2/3, of the Danish population would prove to suffer from narcissistic personality disorder, with the most severe levels evident in the communist, socialist, and fascist parts of society. Although the DSM has been used for set guidelines for psychotherapy in large parts of the Western world for more than 30 years, including Denmark and large parts of Europe, narcissistic personality disorder, curiously, is not recognized in Europe by International Classification of Diseases, or ICD, published by the World Health Organization located in Europe. Evidently, this is a necessary measure made to obscure the dreadful fact that collectivism causes mental illnesses. Areas of psychotherapy in radicalized collectivist nations of Europe, therefore, generally use the IDC-10 and refute narcissistic personality disorder. Of further curious interest is why psychotherapy in Europe's neighboring individualistic nation of the United Kingdom recognizes the mental illness. In England, narcissistic personality disorder has even been used in forensic psychology for legal defense purpose. However, regardless whether the disorder is recognized or refuted, with an average of at least 7 easily observable narcissistic tendencies or more in the most radical collectivist parts of society, indeed extreme pathological narcissism, psychopathy, is the key to collectivism. Narcissism consists of 9 tendencies. An individual must demonstrate 5 or more to be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. In general assessments of narcissistic personality disorder, the autonomous narcissist, also known as a megalomaniac and characterized by superiority complex, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements and will debase anyone to ensure this superiority. The Marxist narcissist achieves these exact identical actions by means of exploiting history's utmost deceptive illusion, which is the notion of social equality, also known as social equilibrium. So rather than turning to superiority complex and expecting to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements, the Marxist narcissist turns to employ inferiority complex and expects to be treated entirely equal without commensurate achievements, and will debase anyone who by any means ever appears or acts superior to the Marxist narcissist's extreme inferiority complex, what I choose to refer to as inferiorlomania. These general characteristics of superiority complex have been the primary assessments employed to diagnose narcissistic personality disorder. Consequently, by hiding in plain sight, Marxism has managed to evade detection for its entire era, camouflaged almost entirely by inferiority complex. Narcissistic tendencies or customized radical collectivist traits. Grandiose sense of self-importance, for example, exaggerates achievements, skills, and talents to the point of lying. Common sensations of excessive moral superiority and takes for granted that others see this greatness. Over-examines and compulsively corrects, policing, or downgrades other people, projects, statements, dreams, or achievements, etc., in an unreasonable manner. Preoccupation with success, for example, fantasies of unlimited power, irrational ideas of achieving a perfect society with equal opportunities, entirely equal treatment, and elimination of poverty, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love, etc. Believes that he or she is special, for example, feels unique and only can be understood by or should associate with other special people or institutions, for example, collectivists, etc. Requires excessive admiration, for example, gives overstated compliments for the purpose of personally prying in, for example, the subject, the debate, or the other person, or for attention, affirmation, adulation, expects to be rewarded for appreciation in others. Narcissistic supply. Has a very strong sense of entitlement, for example, demands automatic and full compliance with his or her expectations, or holds expectations of unreasonable favorable treatment. Feels entitled to other people's personal possessions, for example, property, earnings, etc. Exploitative of others, for example, interpersonality, chameleon, elusive, pathological lying, cunningly exploits the system, establishments, and people, etc., for personal gain. Lack of empathy, for example, unable or unwilling to identify with the feelings of others, their needs, rights, property, preferences, and priorities, etc. Envious, for example, bears a grudge towards successful people of better psychological and economic standing, etc. Arrogance, for example, displays regular negative attitudes, haughty, snobby, compulsively judgmental, and opinionated. Omniscient, highly conclusive about things in which the individual has factually no inside knowledge, magical thinking, regularly projects, tries to dump shame upon others, the weapon of guilt, and hypersensitive to criticism, rages when contradicted, confronted, or disapproved of. All these inhibitive rules are hard to truly clarify, although there are two unwritten rules within the mentality that are in fact the easiest to explain. The first rule is in regard to a person who shows self-assurance or expresses one's achievements. This is an absolute breach of these narcissistic inhibitions. Contrary to this unwritten rule, these inhibited rules are not breached if an individual shows pride or confidence in oneself collectively or nationally, or otherwise as part of a group. Likewise, this rule is not breached if one utters approval of another individual's achievements or status. The second rule, a truly deceiving yet absolutely vital dynamic in collectivism's pathological mind game, which blinds anyone who does not know the true nature or psyche of the collectivists, is that collectivists constantly seem to adulate. To a Marxist who has never expressed true personal self-assurance, cheering others is a subconscious prize. This excessive need for affirmation and self-love is referred to as narcissistic supply. The basic subconscious thought being, I feel self-important, Therefore, I expect to be rewarded for my appreciation of you. This seemingly kind gesture or adulation is required so I can feel good about myself, indulge my grandiose ego, and embrace my high self-regard. One thing that can therefore truly set off the collectivist's inhibitive emotions is encouraging oneself rather than adulating for reciprocal appreciation. Viewed from the twisted mindset of the Marxist and caused by excessive entitlement, lack of affirmation is considered inappropriate, self-absorbed behavior, which generally results in irritation, argumentation, and oftentimes name-calling. While at the same time as the attempt to equilibrate suppresses, a process exists that would and does create depression. Excessive collective affirmation attained through feelings of excessive moral superiority and self-importance, therefore, actually only makes up for the suppression created when demeaning and humiliating another's performance, professionalism, success, and happiness. Adulation is the collective human organism's constant attempt to keep harmony of this suppression. Excessive affirmation or narcissistic supply is obscured to the untrained eye, yet it simultaneously enables Marxism's collective human organism to be remotely in charge of society's codependency on a personal level. A quote by Sigmund Freud: "Analysis does not set out to make pathological reactions impossible, but to give the patient's ego freedom to decide one way or another."